I was 16 when the world as I knew it slipped quietly from beneath my feet and something darker, colder, and far more terrifying took its place. I remember that morning the way a person remembers the last warm breath before falling into deep water. Everything felt normal, the soft hum of the kitchen, the distant birds, the faint smell of toast drifting through the hallway. Nothing warned me, nothing whispered danger, nothing hinted that within a few hours I would be fighting for my life in a place that felt like the world had forgotten it existed. I was just a girl, a simple, quiet girl who loved reading, who loved the sky, who believed the world was mostly kind. I did not know how quickly innocence can be pulled away like a curtain revealing a truth you are too young to understand. School had ended early that day, and I had decided to walk home because the sun was warm and the small breeze felt comforting. I remember listening to the soft rhythm of my footsteps on the sidewalk. I remember the weight of my backpack and the easy freedom in my chest. And then I remember the car. A dark old car slowing down beside me like a shadow growing longer across the street. I thought maybe they were asking for directions. I thought maybe they were lost. I was 16 and the world still felt safe. I stepped a little closer without fear because at that age danger feels unreal, like something that only happens in movies. And then the door opened. And then a hand grabbed me. And then everything inside me shattered. I tried to scream, but a rough cloth wrapped around my mouth. I tried to pull away, but the grip tightened like steel. I remember the smell inside the car, stale. I remember the way my heart pounded so loudly I could barely think. The world rushed by the windows, but no one saw me, no one heard me, no one knew that a 16-year-old girl was disappearing from the bright daylight into something cruel and silent. I did not know where they were taking me or why. I only knew I had to stay awake, I had to remember, I had to survive. The car drove for what felt like forever, and every mile stole a little more of my hope. By the time they pulled me out, I could no longer feel the warmth of the sun. The world felt colder, the air felt heavier. They dragged me toward an abandoned shed at the edge of what looked like a forest. I could hear distant crows calling like warnings, too late for me to understand. Inside the shed, it was dark except for one broken window, where thin light spilled like a sad confession. The floor was dusty and the air was thick with the smell of rust and old wood. They tied my hands, they tied my feet, they left me on the ground like something discarded. When the door slammed shut, the silence felt like another kind of prison. I was 16 and I was alone. For a long time, I did not cry. Fear had swallowed my tears. I remember trying to listen to my heartbeat, trying to keep track of its rhythm, as if losing it would mean losing myself. I whispered to myself over and over, I will not die, I will not die, I will not die. Time was strange inside that place. Minutes felt like hours and hours felt like days. Sometimes I heard footsteps outside, sometimes I heard whispers, sometimes I heard nothing at all, which was somehow more frightening. When one of them returned, he carried a flashlight, its harsh beam cutting through the darkness, landing on my face like a cruel reminder that I was still trapped, still helpless. He asked questions I did not understand. He wanted fear, and he got it. He wanted silence, and he got it. I learned quickly that sometimes survival means holding your voice deep inside your chest where no one can break it. The first night was the longest night of my life. Cold crept into my bones. Hunger gnawed at my stomach. The darkness pressed so close around me I felt like I was drowning in it. Every sound made me jump, every silence made me tremble. But somewhere inside the fear, a small spark of something stubborn remained. Call it hope. Call it instinct. Call it the last piece of a girl who refused to disappear. That spark kept whispering, survive, survive, survive. When morning came, the thin light through the window felt like a blessing. My wrists were raw from the ropes and every part of me ached, but the light reminded me that the world still existed outside that shed and maybe there was still a way back to it. I listened carefully every time they opened the door. I watched their movements, their habits, their routines. I learned the sound of their shoes, the weight of their footsteps, the moments they argued with each other. Every detail mattered because every detail could become my way out. By the second night, something inside me hardened. Fear was still there, but survival sharpened into determination. I remembered the stories of women who fought back, women who endured, women who made it home even when the world thought they never could. And I told myself I will be one of them. The second night, they argued louder than usual outside the shed. I heard the scrape of metal, I heard one of them curse, I heard one storm away into the woods. For the first time, I sensed weakness in their control. A small crack. A small opening. I pulled at the ropes on my wrists again and again until I felt a slight give. Pain shot through my skin, but pain meant nothing compared to the chance to live. I twisted, turned, scraped, pulled until one wrist slid halfway free. Not enough to escape, not yet. But enough to hope. Hours crawled by with that tiny hope burning quietly like the glow of a dying ember refusing to fade. When dawn approached, I heard something strange. A distant engine. A door slamming. Voices, not theirs. I could not see who it was, but the panic in the footsteps of the men who took me told me everything. Someone unexpected had arrived. Someone who did not belong to their world. They shut the shed door, but this time they forgot something. They forgot to tighten one of the knots. My right hand slipped free. My heart raced as I untied my left. I moved slowly, silently, fearing every sound. The door was locked, but the old window was loose at the edges. I pushed it once. It creaked. I froze. I pushed again. The wood gave way with a soft groan. Beyond the window was the cold morning air and the sound of nervous voices arguing. I climbed through, scraping my arms on the broken frame, feeling the sting of fresh cuts, but the freedom of the open air felt like a prayer. I ran. Barefoot. Weak. Terrified. But I ran. Branches tore at my legs, the ground was uneven, the forest was thick, but I kept going because every step was one step closer to life. Behind me I heard shouts. They had noticed my escape. I pushed harder, ignoring the ache, ignoring the burning in my lungs. At one point I stumbled and hit the ground so hard the breath was knocked from my chest, but fear lifted me back to my feet before I even knew I had fallen. Finally, through the trees I saw a dirt road and a distant figure near a parked truck. I screamed, a sound raw and broken. The man turned, saw me, saw my fear, saw my desperation, and ran toward me. He asked what happened, but all I could say was, "Help me, help me, help me." He put me in his truck, locked the doors, and drove as fast as he could. I looked back once through the rear window and saw nothing but trees. He took me straight to the sheriff. The world from that moment moved in soft, blurry pieces. Questions, voices, flashing lights, warm blankets, gentle hands. I felt safe for the first time in 2 days. My parents arrived hours later, and the sound of my mother's cry when she saw me will stay in my heart forever. I was home. Alive. Changed. I did not sleep for many nights. My dreams were tangled with shadows and footsteps and cold rope. But slowly fear loosened its grip. Slowly I learned to breathe again. Slowly I learned to walk in the sun without flinching. People called me brave, but I never felt brave. I felt like a girl who had been thrown into darkness and somehow found her way back. A girl who refused to let her story end at 16. A girl who survived because something inside her refused to stop fighting. Now, whenever I look at the sky, I remember that morning before everything changed. I remember the warmth. I remember the breeze. And I remember that even the smallest light can guide you through the darkest place. I survived 48 hours that tried to break me. But they didn't. They reshaped me. They revealed a strength I never knew I had. And now when I tell my story, I tell it so that someone else out there who feels trapped, who feels alone, who feels scared might hear my voice and think, if she survived, maybe I can too. When I returned home after those 2 days that stretched into something that felt like years, my room did not feel like the same room I had lived in since childhood. The walls were the same color, the bed was the same bed, the window still let in the same soft morning light, but everything inside me had shifted and nothing felt familiar anymore. My mother sat beside me every night holding my hand as if afraid that if she let go even for a moment, I might slip away again into some dark place where she could not reach me. My father paced the hallway most nights, unable to sleep, unable to rest, unable to make sense of how his little girl had come so close to vanishing. Sometimes I would wake up to the sound of his footsteps, and I could feel how helpless he felt, and I wished I could tell him I was going to be okay, even though I was not sure what okay meant anymore. The first few days after I came home, I barely spoke. Words felt heavy inside my chest. Every time I tried to talk, the memories rose like cold water flooding my throat. I felt watched even when no one was watching. I felt held by invisible hands even when I was alone. My mind replayed everything: the smell of the shed, the rough feeling of the ropes, the fear that wrapped around my ribs like iron. I wanted to forget, but my body remembered even when my thoughts tried not to. My parents took turns checking on me even during the day, but I could see the exhaustion growing in their eyes. Fear had crept into our home, and it refused to leave. One evening, a soft knock came at my door, and when I looked up, my mother stepped inside with a small tray of tea. She said she had made it the way I used to like it, hoping maybe the memory of warmth would reach me. I tried to lift the cup, but my hands shook so much I had to set it back down. She took my hands in hers and whispered, "You are safe now," and even though her voice trembled, she kept repeating it until my heartbeat slowed from its frantic rhythm. Safe. The word felt too big, too distant, too fragile. But I held it anyway. At night, the shadows were my enemy. Every creak of the house made my breath freeze. Every brush of the curtains made my heart race. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, feeling as though the darkness of that shed had followed me home and set itself in the corners of my room. For many nights, sleep came only in pieces, and each piece ended with the same jolt, the same memory, the same fear. And yet, even in those broken nights, something inside me kept whispering, "Stay here, stay in the light, stay alive." Weeks passed slowly, and each day I tried to do one small thing to return to the world. One day I walked to the end of the driveway. Another day I sat outside on the porch and let the sun rest on my skin. Another day I stepped into my room without checking behind the door first. Small victories, but victories all the same. And then one afternoon, the sheriff came to our house. My parents spoke with him while I sat in the living room staring at the carpet, counting the threads, trying to steady myself. When he gently asked if I wanted to tell him what happened, I felt something tighten inside me. I wanted justice, but I did not want to reopen the memory. I wanted to move forward, but I did not want to speak the darkness aloud. Still, I nodded. Because I knew that for those who hurt me to be stopped, my voice had to return even if trembling. The sheriff sat beside me patiently as I told him what I remembered: the sounds, the voices, the way the light came through the broken window, the scent of old metal. Every detail felt like a shard of glass I had to hold carefully. He listened without interrupting, and I could see in his eyes a mixture of compassion and resolve. When I finished, he told me they had arrested the men from Leeds that came after a neighbor reported seeing a suspicious car driving through the woods. Hearing that made my chest tighten in a new way. Relief mixed with fear, mixed with something complicated, something heavy, something almost like triumph. The world was not completely cruel. Someone had noticed something, someone had spoken, someone had cared. The trial took months. I had to sit in a courtroom and see them again. The moment I saw their faces, my breath caught and my hands trembled, but I kept my gaze steady because I was no longer the frightened girl on the shed floor. I was the girl who survived. The girl who ran. The girl who lived to speak. When I testified, my voice shook, but it did not break. I told the truth quietly, deeply, honestly. Every word felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My parents sat behind me, their presence like a warm shield, and when I finished, the courtroom felt different, somehow a little brighter, a little lighter. When the verdict came and they were found guilty, I felt the first true breath of peace since the day I was taken. Not freedom. Not yet. But the beginning of it. Healing, though, was not a straight line. Some days I woke up feeling strong, ready to rebuild, ready to step back into the world. Other days I felt the shadows reaching again, felt the memories waiting, felt the old fear curling in the corners of my mind. But I kept moving slowly, steadily, gently. Therapy helped. Talking helped. Writing helped. Some nights I wrote letters to my younger self, the girl who was taken, who was terrified, who felt alone in the dark. I told her that she was brave, that she was powerful, that she made it out, that she would grow into someone stronger than she ever imagined. And in writing to her, I learned to forgive myself for the fear, for the nightmares, for the trembling, for the days I could not get out of bed. One afternoon months later, I walked to the same street where I had been taken. My legs felt heavy, my breath tight, but I walked anyway. I stood there quietly listening to the wind, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin just like that morning when I was 16. And something inside me softened. The fear did not disappear, but it loosened. The memory did not vanish, but it changed shape. I was not the girl being taken. I was the woman standing tall on the same ground. A year passed, and I found myself sitting in a school counselor's office, not as a student, but as someone asked to share her story with a group of young girls. At first I hesitated. The idea of speaking aloud the darkest moments of my life felt overwhelming. But then I remembered how I had felt in that shed, how alone I thought I was. And I said yes. The first time I spoke, I kept my voice soft but steady. I told them not about the fear, but about the strength that rose from it. I told them how hope survived even in the darkest corner, how one moment of courage can save a life, how it is okay to be afraid, but never okay to give up. As I spoke, I saw the girls listening with wide eyes, some frightened, some inspired, some holding back tears. And I realized my story was no longer just mine. It was a lantern I could pass forward. A light in someone else's darkness. Over time, I became involved with organizations that helped other survivors. I sat in circles with women who had lived through their own nights of fear, and we shared our stories not to relive the pain, but to redeem it. We learned that healing is not forgetting. Healing is remembering without drowning. Healing is living without being defined by the wound. Healing is choosing to breathe even when the air feels heavy. Years later, when I turned 18, I visited the forest again, not out of fear, but out of closure. The shed was gone, torn down by the county, replaced with empty land overgrown with wild grass. I stood there for a long time, feeling the wind move through the trees. And I whispered to the girl I once was, "You made it. You survived. You are free." Now I often share my story with others who need to hear that survival is possible, that healing is slow but real, that strength lives in places we do not expect. Sometimes people ask me how I found the courage to run, how I found the strength to fight, how I lived through those 48 hours. I tell them the truth. I did not feel brave. I did not feel strong. I simply wanted to live. And that one became a force more powerful than fear. Now when I walk through sunlight, now when I hear birds in the morning, now when I feel the warmth of the world on my skin, I remember that girl in the dark learning how to keep breathing. She is still with me. She always will be. But she is not a shadow anymore. She is the reason I stand tall. The reason I speak. The reason I help others. The reason I know that even in the moments when life shatters into fear and pain and silence, a spark inside us can still glow. A spark that whispers, "Survive, survive, survive." And sometimes that whisper becomes the roar that saves us. And so I tell my story again and again, not to relive the darkness, but to honor the light that rose from it. Because somewhere someone is scared and alone and waiting for a voice that says, "I made it through and you will too." And I hope that when they hear mine, they feel a little less alone, a little more brave, a little more ready to hold on to tomorrow. There came a day when I realized the world no longer looked like a place filled with shadows waiting to pull me back into fear. It happened quietly, almost softly, as if healing had been walking beside me for months, and I only just turned to notice it. I was sitting near a window in a small coffee shop, the kind with warm lights and old wooden chairs and soft music humming in the background. I had gone there because I wanted to test myself, to sit in a place surrounded by strangers, to feel the movement of life around me without shrinking away. At first, I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the old habit of watching every entrance, every exit, every face. But then something shifted. A gentle breeze carried the smell of warm pastries. A little girl laughed at something her mother whispered. Someone behind me stirred a drink, and the sound was almost musical. For the first time in a long time, I felt the world simply being the world. Not dangerous. Not threatening. Just alive. I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed in the soft stillness. And I felt something settle inside me. A kind of quiet peace. A kind of yes. A kind of I am here and I am whole. When I opened my eyes, I saw a reflection in the window. A young woman. Older than the girl who was taken. Stronger than the girl who ran. Softer than the girl who trembled in the dark. She looked back at me with eyes that had seen fear and still held hope. And I thought maybe healing is not a finish line. Maybe healing is simply learning to stand in the light even when the shadows still whisper. I spent more time speaking with other survivors. We shared our stories like threads weaving a tapestry of pain and courage, loss and triumph, heartbreak and rebirth. Sometimes we cried together. Sometimes we laughed at how absurdly strong we had become. Sometimes we sat in silence, because silence between those who understand does not feel empty. One of the women I met had survived something even worse than I had, and yet her smile lit up every room she walked into. When I asked her how she managed to shine after everything she had been through, she told me the world tried to break me, but it failed, so now I try to live like someone who cannot be broken. Her words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I carried them with me. One evening months later, I stood on a small stage in a community hall facing rows of people who had come to hear my story, people who wanted to understand courage, resilience, survival. I remembered the first time I spoke how my voice trembled like a leaf in the wind. Now my voice rose gently but steadily, clear and warm like a candle flame refusing to go out. I told them about fear. I told them about hope. I told them about the moment I believed I would never see sunlight again and the moment I saw it through the window as I escaped. I told them how healing is not about forgetting but about allowing yourself to breathe again. When I finished, a woman in the back stood with tears in her eyes and whispered thank you, and though her voice was soft, I felt its strength reach all the way to me. I stepped off the stage feeling lighter. As if each time I spoke I set down one more piece of the weight I had been carrying. Life continued gently. I finished school. I started college. I studied psychology because I wanted to understand the mind, the wounds it carries, and the incredible ways it can heal. I wanted to help others find their light the way I had slowly rediscovered mine. In my first year of college, I had a professor who asked everyone in class to share one thing that shaped who they were. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to choose my words carefully. I said quietly, I learned that people are strong. Then they believe even when they feel powerless, and sometimes surviving is the bravest act anyone can do. The room fell silent, and the professor nodded with gentle understanding. Later that night, as I walked back to my dorm, I felt the cool night air brushing against my face, and I looked up at the sky. The stars were scattered like tiny lanterns guiding travelers through the dark. And I thought how strange it is that the same world that holds darkness also holds immeasurable beauty. How strange and how wonderful. During my second year of college, I received a letter from the truck driver who had helped me the day I escaped. He had found my family's address through the sheriff and wanted to know if I would be open to meeting him. My heart swelled with gratitude. I agreed. When I met him at a small diner, his eyes softened when he saw me standing there, tall, strong, alive. He said, I have always wondered what happened to you. I never forgot that day. I smiled and told him I made it, I survived, and I am healing. He placed a hand over his heart and said, you were the bravest person I ever met. I shook my head gently because even after all the years I still did not feel brave. I felt human, frightened, hurt, determined, alive. But as we spoke, I realized something important. Bravery is not the absence of fear. Bravery is choosing to move through the fear. And I had done that again and again. After college, I began working with young survivors, teaching them grounding techniques, helping them find the strength inside themselves, reminding them that their story did not end with what was done to them. Some days the work was heavy. Some days it carried the weight of so many broken hearts, so many trembling hands, so many stories whispered through tears. But in each one I saw a spark. A spark just like the one that lived in me when I whispered, survive, survive, survive. And I made it my mission to protect those sparks, to nurture them, to remind these young souls that their pain did not define them. Their courage did. Years passed. I grew older, stronger, calmer. The nightmares faded, though they never fully disappeared. Sometimes they visited like distant echoes, soft reminders of where I had been. But they no longer controlled me. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, I felt an overwhelming gratitude. For the girl who fought. For the woman she became. For the light that guided her through every shadow. A neighbor passed by and waved. Children played down the street, their laughter floating like music. The world felt soft and safe. I closed my eyes and breathed in the warm air. And I realized that survival is not just living through the darkness. Survival is learning to love the light again. Survival is believing in tomorrow even when yesterday tried to take everything from you. Survival is quiet. Survival is fierce. Survival is mine. And with every breath I take, I honor the girl who made sure I lived long enough to tell this story. Because somewhere out there someone needs to hear that healing is possible. That hope can return. That life can rise again. And I want them to know that if I survive those 48 hours and the years of healing that followed, then they can survive what they are facing too. They can rise. They can breathe. They can live. And they can shine. Just like I learned to shine again. I remember the way the night wrapped itself around me like a shroud as I stepped deeper into the forest, guided only by the soft glow of my shaky phone light and the sound of my own heart pounding like distant thunder in my ears. Every step felt heavier, colder, quieter. I kept replaying Jake's warning in my mind as if it were the last anchor holding me together. If they are still looking for you, hide. Do not run in the open. Do not make a sound. And do not trust anyone who calls your name. They might know your name by now, May. They might try to lure you out. Those words filled my thoughts like a heavy fog, and I realized the truth in them as soon as I heard the distant crunch of footsteps that did not belong to me. Someone was out there, moving with slow, careful intention. Searching. I dropped down behind the thick roots of an old tree and pressed my hand over my mouth, afraid even the sound of my own breath would betray me. The footsteps grew louder, then softer, then paused. Silence followed. A silence so sharp it cut through the dark like a blade. And then I heard it. May. It was a man's voice, but not the one I remembered from the cabin. Softer, calmer, almost gentle. May, sweetheart, are you there? We are here to help you. Come to me. My whole body froze as fear shot down my spine like lightning. I had never told anyone in this forest my name. No one except Jake. But this voice did not belong to Jake. This voice belonged to them. They were already searching. Already hunting. Already adapting. I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, though it might have been only minutes. When the footsteps faded and the night swallowed the sound again, I forced myself to stand and keep moving. Every muscle trembled. My hands were icy. My throat tight with suffocating fear. But something fierce inside me refused to give up. I kept walking until the forest changed. The trees thinned. The air shifted. And I saw a clearing ahead, lit faintly by the moon. There was a wooden structure at the edge of it. Old, broken, leaning to one side like it wanted to collapse under the weight of its own years. A hunting stand. Maybe safe, maybe not. But it was something. And I needed something. I climbed up carefully, feeling the wood groan under each step, and when I reached the top, I pressed my back against the wall and exhaled the first full breath I had taken in a long time. My legs were shaking uncontrollably, and my throat burned from thirst, but at least I felt hidden. At least for a moment. The forest breathed softly below me as if it were listening. Watching. Waiting. I curled my arms around myself, trying to keep the cold from digging deeper into my bones. And that was when the memories began to break open again like wounds that had never healed. I remembered the car. The blindfold. The smell of gasoline. The rough hands. The whispers. The laughter. The fear that swallowed me whole. I remembered thinking I was going to die. That my life would end in that cabin with no one ever finding me. No one knowing what happened. No one hearing my last words. The hunting stand creaked slightly, and I nearly jumped, but it was only the old wood settling beneath the weight of the night. Still, my heart would not slow down. It kept beating against my ribs like a fist begging to escape. Eventually, exhaustion began to pull me under and my eyes grew heavy, but I forced myself to stay awake because sleep felt dangerous. Sleep felt like surrender. And I could not afford surrender. I must have drifted anyway because the next sound I heard snapped me awake so violently I nearly fell forward. Leaves rustling. Twigs snapping. Voices. 2 of them. Low quiet. Too close. I pressed myself against the wooden floor holding my breath as their shadows moved near the clearing below. She could not have gone far, one of them said. She is barefoot and hurt, the other replied. She will slow down eventually. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might be sick. They were right under me. They were close enough that I could hear the gravel in their voices, the annoyance in their tone, the hunger for control. One of them kicked something on the ground and I flinched, though I did not move a single inch. When they finally walked away, fading into the darkness, like ghosts, I let out a breath I had not realized I had been holding for minutes. My whole body sagged against the wood. I knew I had to keep moving. I knew staying in one place was a risk. But I also knew that if I climbed down right then I would collapse from exhaustion. So I waited. Listened. And when the forest finally quieted again, I climbed down slowly and kept going. My legs were weak. My feet raw. My throat dry. But I walked. Because something deep inside me whispered that there was still hope somewhere in the dark. I followed the faint slope of the land, feeling the ground dip lower with every step. I knew water often gathered in lower places. And if I found water, I might find a road. Or a house. Or someone who could help me. The sound reached me first. Soft, distant trickling like tiny bells in the wind. A creek. When I found it, I dropped to my knees and cupped the cold water in my hands, letting it cool my throat and clear the fog in my mind. It felt like life itself running through me. I splashed some on my face, wiped it from my skin, and looked up at the stars shimmering faintly above the treetops. For the first time since the cabin, I felt a small, fragile spark inside me. A spark that said, "Keep going, May. Do not stop now." I stood up and followed the creek, hoping it would lead somewhere, but before long the forest thickened again and the sound of distant engines cut through the quiet. Vehicles. More than one. My heart stuttered. Were they coming for me? Were they searching? I ducked behind a fallen log and listened. The engines grew louder, then slowed, then stopped. Doors slammed. Low voices murmured. Flashlights flickered between the trees like restless stars. They were organized. They were coordinated. This was not some random impulse crime. This was planned. Structured. And they were not ready to lose me. I lay flat on the ground and pressed my cheek against the cold, damp earth, praying the darkness would hide me. Minutes crawled by like hours. And then I heard a sound that nearly shattered me. Dogs. They had brought dogs. My breath caught in my throat as fear swallowed me whole. I whispered softly to myself, almost silently. May, you must move now. Now. I crawled inch by inch away from the log, keeping my body low as the voices grew louder behind me. When I reached the thicker brush, I stood and ran despite the pain stabbing through my feet and legs. Branches cut my skin. Stones bruised my soles. But I kept running. I ran until my lungs burned and my vision blurred. I ran until the sounds behind me faded again. I ran because stopping felt like giving them my life. And I refused to give them anything more. Hours might have passed. Maybe more. I could not tell because the night felt endless and the terror made time lose all meaning. But then something strange happened. The forest began to change again. The trees thinned. The ground leveled. The air grew warmer. And the faint outline of a fence appeared between the branches. A fence meant property. And property meant people. I pushed forward with every bit of strength I had left, and when I reached the fence, I grabbed the top wire and pulled myself over, ignoring the sting as it scraped my palm. I fell to the other side and landed hard, but I got up again because hope was stronger than pain in that moment. Ahead of me was a house. Small old porch light flickering. But a house. A place with walls and doors and maybe someone who would listen. I stumbled forward, nearly tripping over my own feet, and reached the porch. My hands shook uncontrollably as I knocked. No answer. I knocked harder. Still nothing. The world spun a little as exhaustion pulled at my edges, but I refused to fall. I banged on the door again, using the last bit of my strength. Finally, footsteps echoed inside. The door opened, and a woman in her 60s stood there wearing a faded robe, and worry etched across her face. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" I tried to speak, but my throat locked up and tears rushed down my cheeks before I could stop them. She reached out gently and touched my arm. "Honey, come inside. You're safe now." But as soon as she said those words, the sound of engines roared in the distance again. Closer. Faster. She looked past me and her face turned pale. "They're coming," she said softly. "Get inside now." She pulled me and shut the door and locked it while I stood trembling in her small living room, afraid to breathe, afraid to think. And as the engines grew louder outside, the truth settled heavy in my chest. I was not safe yet. Not even close. But I was not alone anymore. And that small truth kept me standing. Kept me breathing. Kept me believing that maybe, just maybe, I could survive the rest of this night. The engines outside grew louder until the whole little house seemed to vibrate with the sound, and I felt the woman's hand gently steady my shoulder, as if she knew I might collapse from the fear rising in me like a tide I could not control. "Stay quiet, sweetheart," she whispered, and her voice trembled, but her grip was surprisingly strong. She led me deeper into the house, her bare feet soft against the wooden floor, while mine dragged like stones. She pushed open a narrow hallway door, revealing a pantry lined with old jars and shelves stacked with canned peaches, green beans, and dusty mason jars filled with preserves. "Hide in here," she said quickly. "I will handle whatever is happening." I shook my head in panic, terrified of being separated from the only person who had shown me kindness in what felt like an eternity, but she cupped my cheeks with warm, gentle hands and looked straight into my eyes with a calmness that seemed carved from something ancient and unyielding. "Honey, I have lived here 40 years, she whispered. "I know what danger smells like, and I know how to stand against men who think fear belongs to them." She gently pushed me inside the pantry before I could protest. "Stay quiet and do not come out until I say so." The door closed softly, and I found myself swallowed by darkness, with only the faint scent of old wood and preserved fruit to ground me. I crouched low between two shelves, hugging my knees to my chest, my body still trembling from the cold, from fear, from everything that had been ripped from me these last hours. A moment later, there were heavy fists pounding on the front door. My breath caught in my throat, and every muscle in me stiffened. I heard the woman's voice, steady but cautious, as she opened the door. "Can I help you?" A man answered, and even though I did not recognize the voice directly, something in it made a sharp pain bloom in my chest. He sounded authoritative. Too authoritative. As if he were used to getting exactly what he wanted. "We are conducting a search," he said. "We are looking for a runaway teen. She is dangerous. She is unstable. If you see a girl wandering out here, you should let us know." The woman let out a sarcastic huff that I could almost picture on her face. "Dangerous?" she repeated with disbelief. "Honey, no teenager wandering barefoot in the woods in the middle of the night is dangerous to anyone except herself." The man paused, and I could hear his boots shift on her wooden porch. "We have reason to believe she came through this area," he insisted. "We need to check your property." My heart dropped straight to my stomach, ice cold and heavy. I closed my eyes, pressing my forehead against my knees as if I could disappear into the floor. The woman's voice sharpened like a blade. "The only people who check my house without a warrant are ghosts and fools," she said. "So unless you have paperwork signed by a judge, you are not stepping one boot past this front step." The man tried again. "Ma'am, this is a serious situation." "I know exactly how serious it is," she snapped back, "and if you think I cannot smell a lie wrapped in a badge, then you have picked the wrong house." Silence followed. Thick. Tense. Dangerous. I could hear more footsteps outside, more men shifting around, more voices whispering. "She is lying. Check the windows. Call the dogs." The woman raised her voice loud enough to shake the walls. If you put one dog, one boot, or one filthy hand on my windowsill, I will call the sheriff myself, and he is my sister's boy, which means you will be dealing with a very unhappy family reunion." Another long tense silence. Then the man spoke again, this time lower, his frustration barely hidden. "If you see her, call this number." Papers rustled. The woman responded flatly. "I will call the police, not whatever you think you are." The door shut with a solid, heavy thud. The engines rumbled again. Boots crunched on gravel. Voices faded. And then, silence. A silence so heavy I was afraid to trust it. Minutes passed. 5, 10, maybe more. Then the pantry door opened just a crack, letting in a sliver of soft, warm yellow light. "Sweetheart," she whispered softly, "they are gone." I crawled out on shaking legs, and she caught me before I stumbled. "You are safe for the moment," she said, "but we need to think fast." She guided me to the kitchen, sat me at a small table, and poured water from a pitcher into a glass that looked older than both of us put together. "Drink this slowly, your body has been through hell." I sipped the water and felt it spread through me like warmth, slowly thawing something frozen inside. She sat across from me, studying me with eyes full of concern, full of anger, but not at me. At them. "Who did this to you, honey?" Her voice wavered with a motherly softness that almost broke me. I tried to speak, but the words twisted in my throat like tangled threads. Finally, I managed to whisper, "They took me." She nodded slowly, her jaw tightening. "I figured as much." She placed her hand on mine, gentle and steady, grounding me. "You do not need to tell me anything you are not ready to tell," she said, "but I want you to know you stumbled into the right house tonight. You will not face this alone." Her kindness cut through me like sunlight after a storm, and I felt tears gathering in my eyes again. But before I could speak, she straightened in her chair as if she had made a decision that settled her whole spirit. "Listen to me, sweetheart," she said. "Those men will not stop now that they know you escaped. They will come back for another sweep, maybe with more force, maybe with more lies. We need to get you help, real help, before they circle back." I swallowed hard, fear tightening around my ribs once more. "What if they find me?" "They will not," she said firmly, "because you will not be here." My heart skipped. She stood slowly, her movements quiet but purposeful. "My truck is old," she said, "but it will get you to where you need to be. There is a sheriff's station 7 miles from here, and those boys do not take kindly to men pretending to be law enforcement." She walked to a cabinet and pulled out a pair of her own thick wool socks and an old pair of boots. "They will be big, but better than bleeding feet, darling." She knelt in front of me, helping me slip my injured feet gently into the socks, as if I were a child she was caring for rather than a stranger who had appeared on her doorstep in the middle of the night. The tenderness nearly shattered me. She tied the boots snugly, then helped me stand, though my legs trembled beneath me. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered, "we do not have much time." She led me towards the back door, her hand warm around my wrist. But before she opened it, she paused, listening the way someone listens when the forest speaks a language only they understand. The night was quiet. Still. She gave a small nod. "All right, let's go." We stepped outside into the darkness, and the cold wrapped around me again, but this time it did not swallow me whole. Not with her beside me. Not with hope stretching like a faint, distant light ahead. We moved quickly across her yard towards the old pickup parked near the shed, the gravel crunching softly under our feet. Just as we reached it, I heard something in the distance. Engines. Again. But farther off. Growing louder. My breath caught, and the woman squeezed my hand. "Hurry, darling, get in." She opened the passenger door for me, and I climbed inside just as the engines roared closer. She ran around to the driver's side, slid into her seat, and turned the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. "Hold on, sweetheart," she whispered. And with a determined set of her jaw, she drove us straight into the night as the sound of approaching vehicles rose behind us like a wave ready to crash. "I want to tell you something tonight, something I never said out loud before, because it hurts in a place I never quite learned to touch. I grew up believing that love meant staying quiet. No matter how heavy the world felt on my shoulders, I learned to smile, even when my own heart felt like glass, breaking a little more every day. I remember the night I finally realized I was not okay. I was sitting in my car outside the grocery store, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the lights in front of me, and I suddenly realized I had no idea how long I had been there. Minutes. Hours. I could not tell. All I knew was that I felt empty in a way that scared me. A woman tapped on my window and asked, "Sweetie, are you all right?" And that gentle voice broke something inside me because no one had asked me that in so long. I nodded like everything was fine, but when she walked away, I felt tears running down my cheeks before I even knew I was crying. I drove home slowly, feeling every mile like a question I could not answer. Why am I like this? Why am I so tired? Why cannot I just be enough? When I reached home, the house was quiet, and for the first time I realized I was lonely even when I was not alone. So I walked to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and whispered a truth I had never said before. I am hurting, and it is real. I kept staring at my own reflection, waiting for something to change. And then something did. Not in the mirror. In me. Because instead of breaking down, I reached up, wiped my tears, and whispered another truth. I deserve to be loved gently, even by myself. That night, I made myself a promise. A small one. But it saved me. I promised that I would show up for myself even if no one else did. I promised to rest when I was tired. To cry when I needed. To speak when something hurt. To dream even when the dreams felt too heavy. And little by little, breath by breath, day by day, I started to feel like I was coming home to someone I had lost a long time ago. Me. So if you are listening right now and your heart feels heavy and your world feels dim, I want you to hear me. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to feel scared. You are allowed to fall apart. But you are also allowed to get back up. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to heal. I know it feels lonely. I know it feels quiet. But you are not walking this night alone. I am right here. And I believe in you that is trying. Even when no one else sees it.